The third week of the college football season is in the books, and we've had a few players emerge in the Heisman race. We've already had a handful of players fall out of the race as well. Every week, though, there are players that come and go from my list, as we have some newbies this week. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the 10 players I have in my way too early Heisman top 10 after only week 3 of the college football season. Before we get to today's video, make sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you're watching this video, odds are that you love college football, and odds are you are subscribed to my channel, so make sure to subscribe to one of the best college football communities here on YouTube. I'll be posting college football videos every day all season, so make sure to subscribe so you never miss a video. Also, make sure to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. Before I share my Heisman top 10, drop a comment down below with some names that are in your Heisman race. There were probably 5 to 10 players that just missed the cut on my list, so I'd love to hear which names you guys have inside your top 10. Coming in at number 10 is Oklahoma State quarterback Spencer Sanders. Through 3 games this season, Sanders is completing 65% of his passes for over 900 yards with 10 passing touchdowns and only 1 interception. On the ground, Sanders has also rushed for 110 yards with 3 rushing scores. Through the first few weeks of the season, Sanders has been putting up some of the best numbers among all quarterbacks. The only problem for him up to this point is that his competition hasn't really been all that much. Through the first 3 weeks of the season, Oklahoma State has played Central Michigan, Arizona State, and Arkansas Pine Bluff. Now again, he's put up some really good numbers, but the competition isn't the best. Oklahoma State is ranked inside the top 10, and they have a chance to make a potential playoff push. So as long as Oklahoma State keeps winning and Spencer Sanders keeps putting up great numbers against Big 12 competition, he should be right in the hunt until the very end. We have a new player cracking my top 10, and it's Washington quarterback Michael Penix Jr. After spending 4 seasons at Indiana, he transferred to Washington this offseason, and he's been fantastic for the Huskies through the first 3 weeks. He's completing 66% of his passes for nearly 1,100 yards with 10 passing touchdowns and only 1 interception. He was great through the first 2 weeks of the season, but Washington only played Kent State and Portland State. But this past weekend, he had his first Heisman moment as Washington took down number 11 Michigan State. Penix Jr. had one of the best games of his career. He threw for 400 yards with 4 passing touchdowns and no interceptions. His 400 passing yards were the second most he's ever had in a game in his career, and his 4 passing touchdowns were tied for the second most as well. Don't look now, but the Washington Huskies are ranked inside the top 20. If Washington keeps winning games and Penix Jr. keeps lighting up the stat sheet, he might be a dark horse candidate that could be receiving votes at the end of the season. Arkansas had a near scare this week against Missouri State, but KJ Jefferson was able to pull out the victory for the Razorbacks. On the season, he's completing 70% of his passes for just under 800 yards with 6 passing touchdowns and only 1 interception. He's also been a force on the ground as he's rushed for nearly 200 yards with 3 rushing touchdowns. Nearly losing to Missouri State isn't ideal, but KJ Jefferson still put up some really good numbers this weekend. He threw for 400 yards with 2 passing touchdowns and also added 40 yards on the ground with a rushing score. Arkansas is 3-0 on the schedule, and they're ranked inside the top 10, but they have an insanely difficult schedule coming up over the next month or so. If Arkansas is able to make it through this tough stretch with no losses or maybe even 1, KJ Jefferson really can be a legitimate contender within the next few months. He's one of the better dual threat quarterbacks in the entire country, and he's essentially majority of Arkansas's offense. We have our lone running back on this list, and it's Minnesota running back Mohamed Ibrahim. Through the first 3 weeks of the season, he's been the best running back in all of college football. As of right now, he's rushed for just under 500 yards while averaging 7 yards per carry. He also has 7 rushing touchdowns in only 3 games. At the moment, he's number 2 in all of college football in rushing yards. He also leads all of college football in rushing touchdowns. He had his best game of the season this past weekend against Colorado as he rushed for over 200 yards, averaging 9 yards a carry. He also rushed for 3 touchdowns as well. Mohamed Ibrahim has rushed for at least 130 yards in every game this season and has at least 2 rushing touchdowns in every game as well. There are some other really good running backs in the country who I really wanted to have inside my top 10, but Mohamed Ibrahim has been by far the best through the first 3 weeks of the season. I know it's tough to look at 3 games and think about their pace for the rest of the season, but if you look at the 12-game pace that Mohamed Ibrahim's on, he's on pace to rush for 2,000 yards with 28 rushing touchdowns this season. Now, I don't think he's going to reach both of those numbers, but I wouldn't be shocked if he reaches one of them. Although he's in a brand new program, Dillon Gabriel is once again lighting up the stat sheet. Through his first 3 games at Oklahoma, he's completing 67% of his passes while throwing for 800 yards with 7 passing touchdowns and no interceptions. He's also rushed for 65 yards with 2 rushing scores as well. This past weekend against Nebraska, Gabriel really set the tone early on and led the Sooners to an impressive victory. He threw for over 200 yards with 2 passing touchdowns while also having a huge rushing score to put Oklahoma in the lead. We've seen Dillon Gabriel have fantastic seasons in the past. Back in 2019, he threw for 3,600 yards with 29 touchdowns. Then in 2020, he threw for 3,600 yards again with 32 passing touchdowns. If I were to guess, as long as Dillon Gabriel is able to stay healthy this season, he's most likely going to finish the season with 3,500 passing yards and at least 30 touchdowns once again. If Oklahoma continues to win and they find themselves deep in the playoff hunt, Dillon Gabriel finally is going to get that invite to New York as a Heisman finalist. Now, this one may come as a bit of a surprise, as I never thought we'd have a player from Kansas in the Heisman discussion, but quarterback Jalen Daniels belongs on this list. And honestly, you can make the case that he should be a little higher. Through the first 3 weeks of the season, he has Kansas undefeated. He's thrown for 600 yards while completing 67% of his passes. He has 7 passing touchdowns to only 1 interception. Daniels, though, is a major threat on the ground, as he's been arguably the best quarterback rusher so far this season. Through 3 games, he's rushed for 250 yards, averaging 9 yards a carry with 3 rushing touchdowns. This past weekend, he took Kansas on the road to Houston as a 10-point underdog and completely dismantled them. He threw for 160 yards with 3 passing touchdowns while rushing for a season-high 125 yards with 2 rushing scores. I don't know what the hell is going on in Kansas and how exactly they're doing this, but Jalen Daniels has been one of the best stories in all of college football this season. Seriously, if you're able to tune into Kansas's game this week, make sure to do so, because Jalen Daniels is one of the more exciting quarterbacks in all of college football. Still staying at number 4 on my list is Georgia quarterback Stetson Bennett. Georgia keeps winning and Stetson Bennett keeps on having great games. Through the first 3 weeks of the season, Bennett has thrown for 1,000 yards while completing 75% of his passes. He has 5 touchdown passes with no interceptions. For good measure, he's also added 3 touchdowns on the ground as well. As of right now, his passing efficiency rating of 183.5 is the best in the entire SEC. It also is top 10 in the entire country. This past weekend against South Carolina, Bennett put together another solid performance. He completed a very nice 69% of his passes while throwing for 300 yards with 2 touchdowns. He also rushed for a season-high 40 yards while running in a touchdown as well. I've said this in previous videos about Stetson Bennett, but I'll say it again. He's going to put up fantastic numbers throughout the entire season, and Georgia is going to win every game. The only problem for him is that he's likely not going to finish in the top 10 or 15 in passing yards and passing touchdowns, mainly because Georgia is going to be winning by so much, he's not really going to be needed. So although I'm going to have him inside my top 5 for the foreseeable future, it's just tough to see him winning because frankly, I don't think he's going to have the numbers to do so. But the fact that Stetson Bennett is even in Heisman consideration is truly remarkable considering where he was a year ago. So for that reason alone, Stetson Bennett, you'll continue to be inside my top 5. Coming in at number 3 this week is Alabama quarterback Bryce Young. He's been fantastic so far for Alabama this season, as he's thrown for 650 yards while completing 68% of his passes. He's thrown 9 touchdown passes with 2 interceptions. He's also rushed for 150 yards with 2 scores on the ground. He actually had a bit of a slip up this past weekend against Louisiana Monroe as he threw 2 interceptions, but he still completed 72% of his passes for 250 yards with 3 passing touchdowns while also adding in a touchdown on the ground as well. Barring some sort of collapse, Bryce Young is essentially going to be inside my top 3 the entire season. Like I talked about at the beginning of the year, it's going to be very tough for him to repeat after winning it last year. He's essentially going to have to post better numbers than he did in 2021, which is going to be pretty difficult. I still think Bryce Young is one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football, but as of right now, there are 2 guys who I think are just having better overall seasons than he is. Coming in at number 2 is Ohio State quarterback CJ Stroud. Through the first 3 weeks of the season, Stroud is completing 73% of his passes and has thrown for just under 1,000 yards. He has 11 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions. If you guys were watching my videos during the offseason, you would know that CJ Stroud was my preseason pick to win the Heisman Trophy, and this was going all the way back to I think April. But after his showing in week 1 against Notre Dame, I lowered him just a bit. That wasn't because he had an awful game, I was just just a little underwhelmed with how he looked out there. But in his 2 games since, he's been probably the best quarterback in all of college football. This past weekend against Toledo, he completed 82% of his passes for 370 yards. He threw 5 touchdown passes with 0 interceptions. In back-to-back weeks, he's thrown for at least 350 yards with at least 4 passing touchdowns. It looks like CJ Stroud has found his groove, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he puts up these kind of numbers on a week-to-week basis. If I were a betting man, I think he finishes the season with at least 4,500 passing yards and at least 45 passing touchdowns. The only reason I don't have him in number 1 is just because I've been a little more impressed by one other quarterback. And that other quarterback is USC quarterback Caleb Williams. Through the first 3 weeks of the season, Williams is completing 75% of his passes and has thrown for 900 yards with 8 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions. He's also rushed for just under 100 yards with 2 rushing scores. I know that Caleb Williams doesn't have the best numbers among some quarterbacks that are on this list, but he's been the most impressive to me through 3 weeks. He was great against Rice, he was great on the road at Stanford, and I thought he was pretty good this past weekend against Fresno State. He threw for just under 300 yards with 2 passing touchdowns while rushing for 2 touchdowns as well. I wasn't as high on Caleb Williams and this USC offense entering the season, but through the first 3 weeks, they've really proved me wrong. Now, I get that the competition might not be as significant as it's going to be later in the season, so we're going to have to pump our brakes until we see him play a top 25 team. But up until this point, Caleb Williams has really impressed me, and I think as of this moment, he would be my early favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. But between him, Bryce Young, and CJ Stroud, I honestly could see it going either way. I think this has a chance to be one of the craziest Heisman finishes we've seen in recent memory. I think all 3 of these guys are going to put up some insane numbers, and it's just tough to see any quarterback really running away with the award. Well, those are the 10 players that I currently have inside my Heisman top 10. Was there a player that I had ranked way too high, or a player that I had ranked way too low? Or was there a player that I didn't even mention that should have been on this top 10? Like I said back at the beginning of the video, there were 5 to 10 players that I wanted to include inside my top 10, but I just couldn't. So whichever player you think should be on my list, let me know in the comment section down below. Before you leave, make sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you love college football, this is definitely the place for you. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be posting videos every day during the college football season, so make sure to subscribe if you call yourself a college football fan. Also, make sure to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.